my son gave me this old, falling apart house in the woods, acting like it was some special gift for my retirement. Meanwhile, his wife got a fancy apartment in the city with glass walls, a valet to park her car, and a fridge stocked with champagne. He didn't even help me carry my bag up to the porch. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. He just tossed me the key, smiled like he was trying to sell me something, and said, "Hope you like vintage." When I walked into that house, what I found didn't just surprise me, turned everything I believed about my son upside down. Before I tell you more, let me quickly say, if you enjoy stories like this, please like this video, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. Anyway, my name is Linda Reynolds. I'm 66 years old, and just yesterday, my own son handed me the keys to my so-called future, like it was some kind of bad joke. It was supposed to be a big family celebration. Everyone dressed up, they handed out fancy glasses of champagne. We were standing in this rented garden with those little twinkly fairy lights that make everything feel fake. Ryan, my son, stood there grinning like a polished CEO, with Haley clinging to his arm like one of those sparkly Instagram photos. He started going on about family and how important it was to give back to the people who raised us. Everyone clapped, but my chest felt tight. I knew something was wrong the minute he started talking like I should feel lucky. When he gave Haley an envelope, she gasped. He said it was a new chapter, and everyone cheered when she opened it, a penthouse apartment with a view of the city skyline in Atlanta. I didn't even get an envelope. He just reached into his pocket and held out a single brass key like he was tossing me a scrap. "And for Mom," he said with that smirk he does when he thinks he's being cute. A little escape from all the noise. Everyone turned to look at me. He added, "You always said you missed the quiet. It's a lovely old farmhouse near Jasper. Very vintage, very you." I nodded and forced a smile, pretending it didn't feel like a slap in the face. No one noticed. They all went back to sipping champagne. Haley didn't even glance at me. The only person who seemed to care was Mason, my grandson. He looked at me like he felt sorry, and I held on to that look like it was the only kindness left in the room. Half an hour later, they stuffed me in the back seat of Ryan's shiny Tesla with one duffel bag and a box of dishes Haley said didn't fit the condo vibe. Ryan drove without saying much. He wore sunglasses and chewed gum like he couldn't wait to be done. I tried to ask questions. How long was I supposed to stay there? Did the place even have power or running water? He kept his eyes on the road and said, "It's a solid place. Think of it like a little retirement adventure. You always wanted space." But I hadn't wanted that. I wanted my son to remember how I raised him alone after his dad died, how I worked long shifts at the hospital so he could go to college, how I even helped pay his rent when his startup wasn't making any money. When we finally turned onto a gravel road that looked like no one had driven on it in decades, I felt my heart sink. The house was leaning to one side. The paint was peeling off like old skin. The porch looked ready to fall in. I didn't say a word. I just got out with my bag and turned to say goodbye. Ryan didn't even bother parking. He tapped the steering wheel and said, "You'll be fine. Wi-Fi might be spotty, but hey, you wanted peace." Then he drove away. No hug, no thank you, not even a fake "I love you." As the dust settled, I noticed a little red light blinking over the door, a security camera. It was brand new. The plastic film was still stuck to it. My heart started to pound. Why would an old house in the woods need a camera? What was he really leaving me here for? When I finally walked inside, the silence hit me. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that feels nice. It felt like someone had just stopped talking. The air smelled sour and stale, like the place hadn't been opened in years. But weirdly, it wasn't dusty like I expected. The living room felt like someone had just stepped out and might come back any minute. There was a pair of sneakers by the door, old but standing neatly side by side. The laces were tucked in, not thrown around. On the kitchen table, there was a single coffee mug with a dried ring at the bottom. Then the fridge started humming, which made me jump. The power was on. I opened it, thinking I'd find mold or nothing at all. Instead, there were 2 cans of soda, a stick of butter, and half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. I stood there, chills creeping up my arms. Someone had been here recently. I didn't know whether I should call for help or just run. But my phone had no signal, and I didn't want to freak out if it was nothing. Maybe there was a caretaker, or maybe there was something my son wasn't telling me. I thought maybe Ryan had hired someone to look after the place. I climbed the stairs slowly, holding tight to the railing, listening for any sound, breathing, a voice, but everything was silent. The hallway was narrow, and the wallpaper hung in long strips where it was peeling away. But again, it was too clean to be completely abandoned. Then I noticed the photos on the wall. There were 3 picture frames, and the glass on one of them was cracked. In the first photo, a man I didn't recognize was holding a baby. The next picture showed the same baby, a few months older, sitting in a high chair. The third frame was flipped around, so the photo was hidden. My heart thumped as I reached out and turned it over. My hand went cold. It was Ryan, no older than 2, smiling wide in someone's arms. But it wasn't me holding him. It was a woman with dark hair, her face blurry but smiling like she belonged there. I stared at that picture so long, my knees started to ache. Finally, I turned it face down again, like I was scared it would start talking if I didn't. At the end of the hallway, something else caught my eye: an attic hatch above me. A shiny, new chain lock was bolted across it. The screws were fresh, bright silver against the old wood. Everything else in this house looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s, but this was brand new. I reached up and tested the handle anyway, but it wouldn't move. I headed back downstairs. My heart was racing. I opened the bedroom door, bracing myself for cobwebs or maybe a mouse scurrying across the floor. But instead, the room looked like someone had been living there yesterday. The bed was neatly made. A folded shirt sat on the dresser next to a pair of prescription glasses, resting on top of a book called Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children. My throat tightened. That's when I heard a soft thud above me in the attic. I froze, listening, every hair on my neck standing up. Silence again. I tried to tell myself it was just a squirrel, but deep down it didn't feel like an animal. I turned toward the fireplace. It looked like the only part of the house that hadn't been fixed up or changed. Something shiny glinted behind the iron grate. I reached in and pulled out a sealed envelope, the edges burned and black, like someone tried to set it on fire but then changed their mind. On the front, in thick black letters, it said, "For Ryan, do not destroy." I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the envelope. My hands were shaking. My heart thumped so hard I thought I might faint. For the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't just confused, I was truly scared. I didn't open it right away, not because I was afraid of what it would say, but because, deep down, I already knew it wouldn't be good. I wasn't ready to read something that might prove the horrible feeling I'd had since I stepped into this house. I set the envelope on the nightstand next to the glasses and the book. Then I walked around the room again, slower this time, studying every corner like the walls might whisper secrets. That's when I noticed something white poking out from under the rug beside the dresser. I knelt down and tugged on it carefully. It was another envelope, older than the first, yellowed, wrinkled, almost brittle. Across the front, in faded ink, was the name Claire Donovan. I didn't know that name. At least, I didn't think I did. But something about it felt familiar, like I'd heard it years ago, maybe in one of Gerald's hushed phone calls before he died. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and unfolded a thin letter. The handwriting was neat and slanted, careful but full of feeling. "If this letter is being read," it began, "then I have lost the last battle I was willing to fight. My name is Claire Donovan. I am the biological mother of Ryan Reynolds." I stopped reading. My ears were ringing. The room tilted around me. I blinked, hoping the words would look different the second time. But they didn't. My fingers dug into the paper as I kept reading. Claire wrote about being sent to a mental hospital after she had postpartum depression. She said Gerald, my husband, the man I had trusted with everything, used her illness to take Ryan away. She said he lied to the courts, painted her as crazy. And when she finally got out, Ryan was gone and so was Gerald. He'd married someone new, she wrote, a quiet, kind nurse. "I don't blame her," Claire wrote. "I blame him. He stole my son and built a new life on top of my grave." My stomach turned. Was that Mitha new woman? No, it couldn't be. Gerald had always told me Ryan's mother died in a car crash. He'd said he was left alone with a baby. I'd never thought to question it. Why would I? He'd been grieving, broken, and I thought that meant he needed me. I flipped the page and found a photocopy of a birth certificate. Ryan Donovan, born April 19, 1987. Mother, Claire Donovan. Father, Gerald Reynolds. My name wasn't anywhere on it. I staggered back and sat down again, feeling like the floor was giving way under me. None of it made sense. Or maybe it all made too much sense. The way Gerald always shut down any talk about Ryan's early years. The way Ryan never felt anything like me in spirit or in heart. The way I'd always felt like a stranger in my own home. Maybe this was why. I kept thinking maybe Ryan had hired someone to look after the house. Maybe all this strangeness had an explanation. I picked up the second envelope, the one marked for Ryan, and, for a moment, I wondered if I should open it. Maybe it was private, meant only for him. Maybe reading it would be crossing a line. But then I remembered how Ryan had dumped me here, like I was an old bag of laundry he didn't want anymore. How he didn't even look back. How his wife had smiled like she was in on some secret I'd never hear. No, I thought. If anyone deserves to know the truth, it's me. I slid a butter knife under the seal and pulled out 3 folded pages and one old photo. The picture was blurry and faded, but I could still see it clearly. Claire was holding baby Ryan, smiling through tears, standing in front of this very house. My heart thumped so hard it hurt. I unfolded the letter. It was addressed to Ryan, and the first line knocked the air out of my chest. Ryan, if you're reading this, then I wasn't allowed to love you. But I never stopped. I sat there for what felt like hours, holding that photo, the letter spread across my lap. My breathing was shallow, like I was waiting for someone to jump out and yell, "It's all a mistake," but no one did. The only sound was the wind pushing through the broken window panes, almost like the house itself had been holding this secret for years. Claire's words were so soft and sad, not angry. Just the quiet heartbreak of a woman who had already lost everything. She wrote about watching Ryan from far away once, when he was about 10, on a school field trip she snuck into just to see him. She described how he laughed at a joke another boy told, how he had Gerald's eyes but her smile, and how she held herself together until she got back to her Korand, then cried so hard she couldn't drive for an hour. On the last page she wrote, "If you ever wonder who you really are, look for the house with the yellow shutters. We were meant to live there together." My stomach twisted. I had painted those shutters myself in 1998, the year Gerald decided to finally fix up the place. Was that a coincidence? Or did he know what Claire meant and turn it into some sick joke? I couldn't sit still anymore. I stood up and marched into the hallway. I yanked open the closet where I remembered Gerald had stuffed old paperwork years ago. The box was still there, duct taped shut, hidden behind brittle coats. I pulled it out, dropped to my knees, and tore it open. Papers flew everywhere, receipts, tax forms, a cheesy postcard from some Vegas convention. Then I saw a folder labeled Adoption State Certified. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were official papers, yellowed with age, with my name typed neatly on the line that said Adoptive Mother. The date was just 2 months after Ryan's 3rd birthday. Gerald had signed everything. The judge had stamped it, but something felt wrong. My own signature at the bottom looked strange, slanted. The letter L was written in a way I never wrote it. My stomach flipped. I grabbed an old journal from my suitcase and compared the handwriting. It didn't match at all. Gerald had forged my signature. He made me Ryan's legal mother without ever telling me he wasn't really mine. Then he built our whole life together on that lie, like it was nothing. And me, God help me, I believed it all. I believed I had held that baby first, changed his diapers, kissed his scraped knees because I was his mother. But I wasn't, was just the stand-in, the cover-up, the easy fix. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My voice got stuck in my throat, like even my body knew this was the moment everything cracked in half. I grabbed my phone and opened the browser. Number, Signal, of course. This place felt like it was designed to trap me, to keep me from calling for help or even thinking straight. I went outside and started pacing in the gravel, waving my phone around like a crazy woman. Still nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A new text, no number, just words. "Stop looking into Claire, you'll regret it." My hands went cold. I looked around. There was no one, but the trees felt too quiet, the shadows too heavy. The porch camera was still blinking. Someone was watching me, and now I knew too much to pretend it was all some mistake. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The text burned into my mind like a warning I couldn't ignore. The truth echoed in my head, louder than the creaks of the old house. And as much as I wished I could tell myself Claire was wrong, or bitter, or confused the papers. The letter, the forged signature didn't lie, and neither did my gut. By morning, I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. Furious at Gerald for the lies, furious at Ryan for tossing me aside, and most of all, furious at myself for never asking questions, for swallowing every story whole like some wide-eyed schoolgirl instead of the woman I should have been. I stood in the kitchen, gripping a cup of lukewarm water like it could somehow keep me steady. My mind kept going back 2 years ago, the very first time Gerald dragged us out to this old house. He'd spent hours down in the basement alone, saying it was too moldy for me and Ryan, that he needed to check on something. Back then, I never questioned it. I didn't ask why a man who didn't have a single hobby or handyman skill needed to spend half a day in a damp basement, but now, I did. I pulled a flashlight out of the kitchen drawer, opened the cellar door, and started down the creaky wooden steps. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with dust and something sharp and metallic like rust, or maybe blood. My heart thumped harder the deeper I went. At the bottom, my flashlight beam swept across old shelves lined with boxes, a stack of wooden crates, and a massive desk pushed against the far wall. Boxes were piled on top of it like someone had tried to hide it. I started digging through everything. Most of it was junk old tax files, a ripped tarp, a broken lamp, but wedged between the desk and the wall, almost invisible, was a small metal lockbox. The latch was rusted, but when I jammed a screwdriver into it and twisted hard, it snapped open. Inside were 3 VHS tapes. The labels were written in thick black marker. Claire Darber 1, Claire Darber 2, Ryan Keep. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't have a VHS player. But then I remembered, the last time we visited, I'd seen an old combo TV with a built-in tape deck up in the attic. Gerald had claimed it was too heavy to move. I climbed back upstairs, dragged a chair over, pulled down the attic ladder, and heaved the hatch open. Dust poured down in clouds, choking the air. But there it was, the little TV, half covered by a moldy sheet. Still plugged in. I hauled it downstairs, set it on a side table, and prayed it still worked. My hands shook as I slid the first tape in. For a moment, there was only static. Then, Claire's face flickered onto the screen. The picture was grainy, the light dim, but she looked straight into the camera. Her hair was tucked behind her ears. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was soft but strong. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I failed in every legal way, and I'm leaving behind the truth for whoever cares enough to listen." My chest tightened. She didn't look crazy or unstable. She looked heartbreakingly clear-headed, like a woman who'd been worn down until there was nothing left but the truth. Claire spoke about the court battles, the doctors who said she was too fragile to keep her baby, how Gerald twisted the records and charmed the social workers. She said he'd even paid someone to rush the adoption through. She said she knew where Ryan was all along but was never allowed to see him. "He was mine," she whispered. "And he grew up never knowing that I wanted to tell him." I tried, but they shut every door before I could even knock. She paused. Then her eyes met the camera, like she was looking straight at me. "Linda," she said, "if you ever see this, I don't hate you, I pity you, because he fooled you too." I covered my mouth as hot tears spilled over my fingers. It wasn't just the sadness. It was how everything suddenly made sense. All the little things I'd ignored, all the questions I'd never asked Gerald, hadn't just betrayed Claire. He built an entire life on that betrayal, and I'd lived in it for 40 years, calling it love. The tape ended. The screen turned black except for the faint flicker of the tracking line. I sat there in the hush of the room, her voice echoing in my head. He was mine, and they took him from me. I hadn't just opened a box. I'd opened a war. I spent the rest of the day in that small living room, the old TV humming quietly behind me, the tapes stacked on the coffee table like silent witnesses. My hands shook every time I looked at them. I couldn't stop replaying her voice, the way she didn't hate me, the way she pitied me, and I didn't know what was worse, feeling ashamed I'd been fooled, or guilty that I'd unknowingly helped erase a woman who never stopped loving her child. As the sun sank below the trees, shadows crawled across the windows. Every creak, every tap of the old boards made me jump. Not because I was scared of the house, but because, for the first time, I understood I wasn't alone in this story. Someone knew I was here. Someone knew what I'd found. Someone might be waiting to make me disappear, just like Claire had. The first knock was soft. I almost didn't hear it over the rush of thoughts in my head. The second knock was louder, sharper. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood up fast, peeked through the curtain, and froze. It was Mason, my grandson, 14 years old, hoodie pulled over his head, backpack hanging low. His face was pale and tight with worry. I yanked the door open. My voice broke when I said his name. Mason, what are you doing here? How did you even? He cut me off. His voice was urgent. Dad doesn't know I came. I saw the texts on his phone. Someone told him you were asking about Claire. He was yelling at Mom about it, saying you weren't supposed to find this house, that everything could fall apart. I just stared at him, too stunned to speak. Mason stepped inside and quickly pulled a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. I Googled her. Claire Donovan, he said, his voice shaking a little. I found some sealed court files and custody stuff, all hidden under judge's orders, but then, I found this. He handed me the paper. It's from the archives. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Your address here, Mason said, pointing to the paper. It was listed under Donovan Property Trust. Why would Dad say he bought it if he didn't? I took the paper from Mason, my hands shaking. Because he didn't, I whispered. It was never his to give. We sat down together, and I told him everything, every last bit. About the letters, the tapes, the fake signature, the adoption, papers about Claire's story, and how all this time, none of it had been what it looked like. Mason didn't blink or argue. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to finally explain the uneasy feeling he'd carried inside. I always felt weird around them, he said, his voice low, like I didn't fit their brand. They care so much about how everything looks. But you're the only one who ever really saw me. My eyes burned. I reached out and squeezed his hand. You don't have to get involved in this. I already am, he said. His voice was soft, but there was a firmness behind it. Dad's been lying to everyone, and if he built his company on stolen money, I cut him off. What do you mean? Mason slipped his backpack off his shoulder and pulled out a thumb drive. There's a hard drive in the basement. You must have missed it. It's hooked up to some old computer. I found it when I hacked into the house Wi-Fi. I copied everything. Look, he handed me the thumb drive like it weighed 100 pounds. It says Donovan Trust transfers. There were payments, big ones, from Claire's estate into Ryan Tech, years before he ever had any investors. My heart nearly stopped. You're saying he used her money to start everything? Mason nodded, jaw tight, and then he buried the records here in the one place no one would ever look. I couldn't breathe for a second. This wasn't just an ugly family secret anymore. This was theft, fraud, a stolen empire built on lies. We have to do something, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Not just for Claire, for you, for everyone he's lied to. Mason looked at me and nodded. Help, whatever it takes. And in that moment, sitting there with the old TV humming behind us, and Claire's tapes stacked in a neat, accusing pile, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I walked into that house. Hope, because I wasn't alone anymore. And this story, our story, wasn't over. Mason stayed the night. He curled up on the couch, hoodie pulled over his head, laptop open on his knees. The screen glowed faintly like a little lantern in the dark. I sat beside him with a blanket over my legs, watching him flip through folder after folder of records he'd copied from the basement. Every file was another puzzle piece I'd never known existed, and with each document he opened, each transaction he traced, he could almost hear the floor under Ryan's perfect life starting to crack. Because there it was, in black and white. Millions of dollars quietly moved out of something called CD Trust into a brand new corporate account, labeled Ryan Tech Holdings. All of it years before Ryan ever launched his first app. I kept asking myself how Gerald had pulled it off, how he'd gotten into Claire's trust in the first place. And the only answer that made any sense was also the one that hurt the most. He must have forged everything, not just my name, but hers, too. He drained the money meant for Claire and Ryan, without even blinking. By sunrise, Mason had tracked 3 big wire transfers straight into the same offshore account Ryan used to get his first investors. This isn't just shady, Mason said. His eyes were wide. It's criminal, like fraud, money laundering, grand theft if it's over a certain amount. I nodded slowly, the truth sinking in like cold water. And this house, I whispered, the land, it was in her name, wasn't it? Mason pulled up the deed records on his laptop and tapped the screen. Yep, transferred to Gerald using a power of attorney right before all the trust money disappeared. But look, there's no bill of sale, no record she ever agreed to it. The transfer was fake too. My hands went cold. He stole her life, I said, my voice barely there. He broke her down until she couldn't fight back. He took her child, her money, her land, and then buried her in silence. Mason looked up at me. His voice was steady, but I could hear the fear under it. We have to expose this. I nodded, but I knew we couldn't do it alone. We needed help, someone professional. Someone who could prove what we'd found without tipping Ryan off. That's when a name came back to me, like a tiny light in the dark. Walter Ellman. He was a retired estate lawyer who used to handle wills and trusts for the hospital board when I worked nights. He always told me, if you ever need real advice, call me. I dug through my old contacts and prayed his number hadn't changed. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was rough but kind, the same as I remembered. Linda, he said. Good Lord, I haven't heard your voice in over 20 years, Walter said when he picked up. I didn't waste time. I gave him the short version, just enough to get him curious and worried. He was quiet for a moment, then said he'd need a day to drive out and look through the paperwork himself. Bring coffee, I joked weakly. I think we're going to need it. When I hung up, Mason turned to me, serious. He's going to try to shut us down when he finds out. We need to back this up. Spread the evidence around, in case something happens. So for the next 2 hours, we sat side by side uploading everything. The files, the scans, the tapes to a private cloud account. Mason made it password protected and he even sent the link to a fake email he'd set up just for this. When it was finally done, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but determined. I looked around at this house, these walls that had hidden so many secrets, the creaking floors that had heard so much pain. And it hit me. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a crime scene. Ryan didn't just owe me the truth, he owed Claire her life back. Walter pulled up the next morning, just as the sun started to rise. His old Buick looked as tired as he did, but when he stepped out with a thick binder under one arm and a legal pad under the other, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe, like maybe someone who'd spent decades practicing law could finally make sense of this nightmare. The moment he stepped inside and saw the tapes, the files, and the financial records spread out across the coffee table, he let out a long, low whistle. He didn't say much, just sat down, flipping through everything fast, nodding every now and then or muttering, "Unbelievable." After almost an hour, he finally looked up at me, and what he said made everything real. "This is enough to trigger a federal investigation, maybe more if you're willing to make it public." I didn't hesitate. "We're willing." Walter looked from me to Mason. His gaze settled on my grandson. "He's a minor. You'll be the face of it." I nodded. "That's fine." "Good," he said, "because people are going to come after you for this. Journalists, lawyers, maybe even private threats. Depends how far Ryan's money reaches. Are you prepared for that?" I wasn't. Not really. But I looked over at Mason, and the steadiness in his eyes gave me courage. "We are now," I said. That afternoon, Walter started building the case. He ordered certified copies of Claire's trust records, the forged property transfers, and began drafting an affidavit to file with the state. While he worked, Mason and I decided it was time to face Ryan directly. No lawyers, no press, just the truth between us. I sent Ryan a text. "We need to talk. No lawyers, no press, just you and me. 1 hour at the house." 15 minutes later, he replied, "Fine." He showed up an hour later, stepping out of a sleek black SUV like he was heading into a board meeting instead of a reckoning. When our eyes met, I could see it how cold and calculating he was, already figuring out what to say to save himself. He walked in and glanced around the living room. His gaze landed on the TV, where I'd paused Claire's tape right in the middle of her talking. "So this is what you've been up to," he said, his voice flat. "Digging up ghosts." I didn't answer. I hit play. Claire's voice filled the room. She was reading a letter one I hadn't watched before. This one was addressed not just to Ryan, but to me. "Linda," she said gently, "if you ever see this, please know I never hated you. I think you were tricked, just like me. You didn't steal him, Gerald did. You were just the next piece in his story, the replacement cast to play Mother. While the real one was erased." Ryan shifted, uncomfortable. Claire's voice kept going. "But if you've raised him, if you've loved him, then you owe him the truth. And if he's grown into the kind of man who can hear it, maybe he'll finally see me for who I was. Not a ghost. Not a mistake. His mother. I paused the tape and looked up at him. My voice shook, but I made sure it was strong. Do you see her now? His jaw clenched. This doesn't change anything. It changes everything, I said. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might faint. You stole her money, her trust, her house. You built your entire life on top of a woman you never even knew, and you let me believe I was part of something real. He scoffed. She was unstable. Gerald told me everything. She couldn't be trusted. Gerald forged court records. I shot back. We have proof. Walter is filing the complaint. The money trail has already been traced. You're not just going to lose your company. You're going to lose everything, unless you come forward and make this right. Ryan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You think this will destroy me? I'm Ryan Reynolds. I've survived worse. Not this, I whispered. I said, not the truth, I told him, my voice steady. Ryan stared at me for a long moment, his face pale and tight. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was heavier than any argument could have been. That night, Mason sat next to me on the old couch, laptop balanced on his knees. I found one more thing, he said quietly. He pulled up a recording from the basement hard drive, an old security microphone neither of us knew was still working. I held my breath as Haley's voice crackled through the speakers, clear as day. If she finds that trust paperwork, Haley said, her voice sharp, we bury her. Just like we buried Claire. Mason looked at me, eyes wide. They weren't just lying, he whispered. They were planning to erase you too. I didn't flinch. I saved the file, backed it up in 3 places, and sat there in the dark, staring at the walls. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I was finished pretending to be powerless. Finished carrying the weight of a lie someone else had built and calling it love. When the first light of morning spilled through the dusty windows and hit the stacks of documents on the table, something in me shifted. My silence was gone. By mid-morning, Walter had emailed everything, every scan, every file, every tape, to an old friend of his, Tracy Hartwell. She was a seasoned legal journalist who'd spent her career exposing inheritance fraud and corporate crime. The kind of woman who couldn't be bought or scared into silence. When she called me directly, her voice was calm but serious. I've read every file twice, she said. This is career-ending. Then you can publish it, I told her, my hands trembling. The moment we're done here, I want to see his face when the story breaks. I sent Ryan one last message. One last chance to tell your truth before someone else does it for you. 2 p.m. the house. He didn't reply, but I didn't expect him to. At exactly 1:59, his black SUV rolled up the gravel drive. This time, he stepped out slower. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His collar was rumpled, and the cool confidence he always wore like armor was slipping. He walked into the living room and saw me, Walter, and Mason waiting. So, he said, his voice tight, what now? You want money? I almost laughed, but I didn't. We want the truth, I said, publicly. We want Claire's name cleared, her property returned, her story told. She's dead, he snapped, his eyes flashing. You don't get to rewrite history. No, I said, stepping closer. You don't get to bury it. Walter handed him a printed release. It was a formal confession. If Ryan signed it, he'd cooperate with an investigation and avoid criminal charges. If he refused, Tracy's story would hit the news within hours. Ryan's hands trembled as he read it, and for the first time, I saw something behind his eyes. That wasn't arrogance, just a flicker of the scared boy I'd once loved. The boy Claire had loved too. The boy who never knew the truth. You think you're the hero in this, he muttered, voice raw. You think destroying everything I built makes you righteous. I think telling the truth makes me free, I said, my throat tight. Something you've never been. He stared at the paper, then back at me. You're nothing but a bitter old woman trying to feel important, he spat. No, I said quietly. I'm the woman who gave up her life to raise a boy who was never really mine. And I still wouldn't have traded a single second until the day he left her, on the side of the road like garbage. That shut him up. He didn't sign. He left the confession on the table, turned, and walked out without another word. 2 hours later, Tracy published her story. The article was everywhere, headlines splashed across the internet. Stolen Trust, the hidden story behind Ryan Reynolds' empire. It included everything. The forged documents, the money trail, Claire's tapes, and the audio clip of Haley whispering. If she finds that trust paperwork, we bury her. By evening, Ryan's board suspended him. Haley vanished from social media. 2 investors filed lawsuits before midnight. And I sat there in the quiet, not to gloat, not to celebrate, but because, for the first time, the silence didn't scare me anymore. It was clean. It was mine. My phone buzzed once. Mason handed it to me. It was Ryan.UN. But it doesn't bring her back. I stared at his message for a long time before typing my reply. No, but it finally makes her real. The days after moved strangely. Part of me felt like time was speeding up, part like it was holding its breath. As the media storm raged and Ryan's empire cracked apart, I stayed in the house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what it looked like when a place full of secrets finally started to breathe again. With every box I packed, every wall I cleaned, every old curtain I took down, it felt like I was making space for the truth to live where the lies used to be. When I pulled down the last of the old curtains, it didn't feel like I was just cleaning a house. It felt like I was uncovering a burial site and finally giving someone back her name, Claire's name, her photo, the one of her holding baby Ryan, in front of this very house, now sits framed in the entryway. Every morning when I walk by, I see her face, no longer blurred by secrets, no longer hidden in some drawer. She looks like herself, and I think she'd be glad to finally be seen. Following Walter's advice, I used what was left of our legal leverage to file for official restoration of the property in Claire's name. The house and what remained of her trust were transferred into a foundation I named for her, the Claire Donovan Foundation for Erased Women. Because, as much as this started with one woman being silenced, I know she wasn't the only one. And I couldn't let this story end with a confession and a few ruined careers. Mason helped design the website. We filled it with everything: scanned documents, timelines, voice clips, even a short documentary cut from Claire's old tapes. On the day we launched it, the site crashed twice from all the people trying to read her story. Mason is proud. I can see it in the way he walks now, his head held higher, like he finally understands what it feels like to use your mind for something real, something bigger than hiding behind a screen. He visits every weekend now. He even moved his gaming setup into the guest room and talks about transferring schools to be closer. This place feels like something that matters, he told me one afternoon, setting his laptop on the kitchen table like he'd always belonged here. And I smiled, because I knew exactly what he meant. Walter still calls every week. He's guiding me through the red tape suits, board investigations, all the foundation paperwork. But he says the hardest part is over. And I believe him, because the hardest part wasn't exposing Ryan, it was unburying Claire. It was digging through decades of lies so the truth could finally breathe. I haven't heard from Ryan since. The last I read, he'd resigned, sold his remaining shares, and moved to a city I won't name. I don't wish him harm. I just wish he'd look in the mirror one day and see himself, honestly, not as a mogul or a tech genius or the victim of a scandal, but as the scared little boy who was taken from one mother and handed to another without ever being asked. I wish he'd let himself miss her, let himself feel it. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but I know this: he can never erase her again. One evening, after Mason left and the house was quiet in that soft, golden way it gets just before dusk, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. I looked out at the trees, and for the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt rooted here, like I'd finally earned my place in this story, not because I was the hero, but because I had finally chosen to be honest. Honest with her, honest with Ryan, honest with myself. I looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "You were right, Claire. He was always yours. I just raised him the best I knew how." And as I turned to go back inside, I could almost hear her voice in the wind, gentle, forgiving, free. I picked up one of her old books, opened it to the first page, and began to read aloud. Not for closure, not for performance, just because I wanted her story to keep going, one word at a time. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.